Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, Governor Josh Shapiro delivered his budget address. We have State Senator Scott Martin, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. He'll respond, and following that, a couple of the state's top reporters will do what? Review the state budget as well. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, it was 90 minutes long. It was perhaps the most comprehensive budget message in modern history, perhaps in the history of the Commonwealth. It had a little something for everybody. I'm talking about Governor Josh Shapiro's budget message delivered to the state legislature and the people in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania this past week. Joining me to chat about it is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Scott Martin. He represents the 13th Senate District in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Senator, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be back with you.
All right. I want to get into some specifics, but before I do that, let me raise this question with you. What I was really impressed with was the response. Obviously, the Democrats more enthusiastic than Republicans, but everyone said, let's sit down and talk. None of the backbiting, none of the feuding. I think that approach makes sense, to sit down and iron out the differences and reach compromise.
Well, and I think it's important. With a new administration comes a new hope, maybe to make inroads where we weren't able to, where things got stale in the past with the last administration. And I think there were a lot of things that were in the governor's budget address that we can rally around, things that maybe that we have already been working on. You know, when you hear him want to talk about licensure reform and the permitting process,
right.
I mean, an ongoing battle, and to have someone in the executive branch who willfully wants to work on that too, it is great. Talk about things related to mental health and the things our students are dealing with, and others in our community. You know, we can build on some of the things that we've been working on. So, with that new hope, as we go into this budget process, hopefully we can bring to fruition that.
And Republicans and the business community, the corporate net income tax decrease, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that was a historic change that we fought for going back to the last budget. But, you know, I mean, all things aside, at the end of the day, no matter what anyone thinks about the entire proposal, is that at that $45.8 billion budget, what we still have to keep in mind is that it still has spending that's exceeding revenues and a structural imbalance, which will end up tapping into and depleting completely that rainy day balance that we also fought so hard to negotiate in last June, and that obviously causes concerns.
And the rainy day fund, the point of that is to deal with emergencies, to deal with crises. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And just to give it an example, we're seeing some volatility right now with tax revenues. A lot of economists think that we may be heading into some dire conditions economically, a potential recession, and that causes state revenues to drop significantly.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to keep funding programs that you need to fund. And just one in point, real estate transfer taxes down almost 40%, and we're seeing that occur across different sectors.
I think what was impressive about it was the breadth of it. I mean, there was literally, as I like to put it, something for everybody in it. Now, you can disagree, or you may say, well, I'm not crazy about A, B, or C, but there is then other letters in the alphabet that comes to mind, just like for obviously the Democrats in particular raised the minimum wage, as I pointed out. For Republicans, do something about decreasing the corporate net income tax. But there was stuff for children, there was stuff for seniors, schools. Maybe they didn't get as much as they want, but it's clear that there's a high priority in this message for the public schools.
Well, and I think it's important, too, as we do wait for the final opinion by the court to come down, is that we have to come to the table and make fixes to this. And so what that number ends up being is we want to make sure what we're investing in education is best for each individualized child's needs. But it's also important to just to point out, with the things that we could potentially agree on, things that we may have disagreements on, sometimes what's in the budget that was not talked about is important. And one
That's
of the
a good point.
And one of the things that's really critical for us, and I'll just throw two of them out there right now. One is they're counting revenue of about $670 million from the implementation of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, that was done by the prior administration. I personally believe that I'm hopeful that they would have withdrawn for that, because that $670 million is going to result in direct higher energy bills for every individual homeowner, for every educational institution, and all to capture 0.3% reduction in CO2 over 8 years.
Right.
You know, to me, with everything that Pennsylvanians are faced with right now, with inflationary costs and small business owners, the last thing we need is a 40% increase in electrical bills. The other big thing, just to point out to you, is that a lot of the programs that were proposed that he mentioned were actually federal programs that the federal government has chosen to no longer fund, because they ended the emergency and chose not to keep funding them. That's close to over $400 million. Is the state now going to be in the business of picking up expenditures for federal programs? And that has recurring impacts down the road.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I'll tell you something that a lot of people are happy about. No sales tax for cell phone purchases. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
My guest this morning is Scott Martin, Senator Scott Martin. He represents the 13th Senatorial District in Lancaster County. He also, importantly, chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. You have a big job ahead of you, because your committee has to deal with the budget, correct?
Well, I've been blessed with a lot of good people, and we're going to be spending the next 10 days pulling every single part of the budget apart. And of course, we start on March 20th, the string of budget hearings with all the agencies.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me go back to a point I made at the beginning, and here's the point: the hyperbole, the bitterness, it all seems to have dissipated. Is that your general sense, that there seems to be a new approach, or am I making that up?
No, I go back to how we opened. I think things had really broken down with the prior administration, especially coming out of the pandemic. Everyone was dug into various positions, and the communication stopped. And, you know, in our business, whether it's with the General Assembly or working with the administration, we have to work together in order to get things done. So I look at it as a new hope. Some people might call it the honeymoon period to get things done. But at the end of the day, you know, we still feel as in the Senate that we also have a mandate. With the Senate Republican Caucus last week, we outlined you know, kind of what our framework was in terms of protecting jobs and growing jobs in PA, empowering families in Pennsylvania, and fiscal sustainability long term.
Yeah, look, we've had the chair of the president of Pennsylvania Manufacturers and the president of Pennsylvania Business, and guess what? Their business community had very nice things to say about Governor Shapiro. So it's obvious that he's reaching out to both sides. And if we go to things like the corporate net income tax, obviously it's likely to be reduced, perhaps not as much as Governor Shapiro recommended. And the same with the increase in the minimum wage. It's likely to be increased. Whether it goes to $15 is very doubtful, but $10, $11, you know, looks like a reasonable compromise.
Well, and I'll say this: no one can dispute the fact that, and we heard it in his address, and we've been talking about this for a while. Pennsylvania has lagged economically and demographically in terms of growth compared to a lot of other states. We lost 40,000 people in the last year. And if we want to grow this state, we have to do the things that are magnets. And so whether it's CNI, whether it's regulatory reform, which is something that sometimes we even hear is a bigger issue than us having the uncompetitive tax, is the regulatory environment. How do we get people to come here in Pennsylvania, create jobs, have those families plant their roots here, but get a mortgage here, send their kids to school here? And it's amazing, when you do that and you have that kind of growth, revenues tend to follow that as well, even to the government. So hopefully we can find common ground on those kind of goals.
Yeah, and I think when he talks about helping folks with intellectual disabilities and autism, I mean, that hits home to so many people in whose families are folks who suffer with those problems.
And you know, I know you have an appreciation for this. You and I both were former Lancaster County commissioners that oversaw behavioral health and developmental disabilities, and a lot of the stories and struggles that people have. And the fact is that there's Pennsylvanians out here that we should not have on waiting lists for desperately needed services, bed space perhaps. And so I think that's another point that we can rally around.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. Now you have an assignment, that is to come back and keep us updated on what's going on.
You know I'll come back anytime.
Thanks for coming. All right, coming up, a couple of the state's reporters are going to chat about the budget, and we'll see what else do they have on their minds. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, we're going to get a reaction to Governor Shapiro's budget and also to Senator Scott Martin. Joining me to do that is John Micek. He's the editor-in-chief of Pennsylvania Capital Star, and Charlie Thompson with the Harrisburg Patriot News and PennLive. All right, Charlie, let's start with you. I'll tell you, I've been impressed with, I'll use the word congeniality. I'm not saying it will last, but boy, this is different from sort of recent Republican and Democratic proposals, differences on the budgets. Take it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big takeaway there would be just that it feels like the honeymoon is still in place in Harrisburg. We've got our first-year governor, Josh Shapiro, who just gave his first state budget address. And, you know, more than in many years, I mean, it really kind of had like a first day of school feeling to it because, you know, the House had been slow in getting organized this year because of the essentially a tie in the makeup between Republicans and Democrats. So not a lot has happened on the legislative front so far this winter. And Shapiro didn't offer a lot of policy in his inauguration, in his inaugural address.
A lot in that address.
So you know, this was sort of that first day of school where he really started to fill in some of the blanks in this canvas that he's painting, and yeah, the Republicans met it with I mean, there wasn't a lot of the automatic knee-jerk partisan conflict that we often see.
But John, there was something in this budget. I mean, first of all, I've never read and heard a budget address with that many items in it. Let me start. That's point number one. Point number two, there was something in there for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this is very much, I think Charlie hit it, this is very much a state of the state address, as other states do it. I mean, the speech lasted something like 75 minutes, and there was literally no budgetary stone unturned by the end of it.
Good point.
But, you know, Governor Shapiro was very canny about this. Democrats clapped when he called for a $15 hour minimum wage. Republicans clapped when he called for a quicker reduction in the state's corporate net income tax. Everybody clapped when he said he was sick and tired of being beat out by other states. It was very savvy, and it goes to the fact that Shapiro, more than any other governor in recent memory comes to the table with pretty extensive experience dealing with the state legislature. He was a member of the state house. He was a Montgomery County commissioner.
Right.
He was state attorney general. So he's been interfacing with the legislature for, a dozen years now? And I think he also understood that given the mathematics of the House, which is very narrowly divided, and the strong Republican majority in the Senate, that he had to come to the table with something that was possible. I mean, Tom Wolf, his predecessor, would throw the most pie-in-the-sky stuff out there, but you didn't really get a lot of that kind of dream big stuff from Shapiro. Everything seemed moderately achievable.
Yeah, I mean, that he makes a great point. And not only that, things that matter to people and not just, Republican conservatives or Democratic liberals, but a wide range of the ideological spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, it was very dense, and he dwelled a lot in the land of the achievable, right? And doing things like permitting reform, talking about giving any business or licensee a date certain by which their application will be decided on, or else you get your money back. I mean, as John said, I mean, that's the kind of thing that the Republicans love, because they feel like it goes to cutting red tape. And there was one point in the address where he really did go political, and that's when he kind of gave this laundry list of things that he said, in this world, they're going to be non-starters, right? I'm not going to roll back abortion rights. I'm not going to allow any rollback of voters' rights.
He made it clear that there.
And so he kind of got that out of everybody's system, but then kind of went right back to, but here's what we can do, because we have some money to do it right now.
Right.
That's another big difference between this budget and many of the past ones.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, we're going to take up a couple of the big issues in the governor's budget message after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
Welcome back. All right, John Micek, there isn't any doubt that one of the most anticipated subjects in the budget message was Governor Shapiro's recommendation for the funding of Pennsylvania's K-12 schools. Yeah, I mean, we were just talking before the break about everything that's achievable. There's no doubt, I think, Terry, that the big policy discussion, the big policy debate is going to be how to meet the mandate of the Commonwealth Court ruling from February that declared the state's school funding system unconstitutional. The governor has proposed hundreds of millions of dollars in more funding for K-12, for special education, for early childhood education, but they still have to meet that mandate from the Commonwealth Court. And you heard Republicans talk about that during the reaction press conferences. So I mean, they're going to they need to come to the table and do something that is achievable. I mean, as much as the other stuff the governor talked about seems easily accomplished, this is a substantive policy debate that has defied resolution for an awfully long time, but they now have this mandate facing them. So the big debate then will not be, will the public schools get an increase, but the size of that increase. Is that accurate? And how they're going to meet both the letter and the spirit of this court order. Yeah.
Which is probably going to be a multi-year process.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, you pick one or two.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that was well received and will probably make a big difference to a lot of seniors in our demographically aging state of Pennsylvania is the expansion of the property tax and rent rebates that goes to moderate and low income seniors who are living in their own home. Shapiro proposed a major expansion in the eligibility threshold and a significant expansion in the amount of rebate that you can get, moving the cap from like $600 to $1,000. Yeah. So that's going to play well here in Pennsylvania. I think he's got this tax credit plan to try to encourage people to get into public service fields, specifically nursing, policing, and teaching.
Yeah.
3 critical public service areas where there's been increasingly anecdotal evidence of staffing shortages that are hurting the delivery of the service.
And that I think is going to be popular. Don't you think that's likely to pass? It's $2,500 a year for 3 years and a tax rebate.
Yeah,
for people going into those fields.
And in the scope of the state budget, that's affordable at this point. He's another one that seems like a hittable pitch, if I may, is
you may.
He's talking about funding 4 new classes of state police cadets to fill in the ranks of departures in that department. So
the scope of that, John Micek, is enormous. I mean, he also talked about mental health.
Oh yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, I mean that is something, Terry, that the counties have sought for a long time. They are struggling at the county level, which is sort of the first level of defense in providing mental health services, with the level of funding, there. So I mean that is something that's going to be sort of immediately popular. I'll pick another one we were talking about before the break, and that's $10 million for indigent defense. Pennsylvania is one of only two states that provides no state funding whatsoever for indigent defense. There's also, at the same time, bills that are making their way through the General Assembly to that effect. So that feels like that is something that could be achievable as well.
Let's not forget about state parks. I mean, he threw geography in there and the use of state parks, which is very big in our state. They're important. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, Terry, the one thing that Shapiro did that I don't really remember the governor's doing before is he gave a couple minutes in that speech to literally every department.
I know.
It was part of it was sort of like a primer of, hey, this is what your state government does, and this is what we think we can make it do better in a Shapiro administration. And was it a little long? Yes, but it was.
I mean, you could tell how enthusiastic and excited he was about delivering that message.
Yeah, I mean, if we could quickly touch on the governor's proposed continuing something like $400 million in programs that were funded through federal stimulus money and having the state pick up that balance. I think I heard Senator Martin allude to that before we came on air, and I think that's going to be another major point of policy contention as well.
Right, because the Republicans are worried that the overall scope of what we're going to have this eternal argument of, is it a 4% increase in spending or a 6% increase in spending? But the bottom line is it's another record amount of state spending.
Right.
And while we have something like $12 billion in reserves now, there is a worry that, if we get into some deficit spending, that'll be gone in 3 or 4 years.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, you stay well.